Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. Well, my special guest today is James Shubsky.
Very good. It's a good Polish name. Few people get it right on the first try.
Yeah, James is a former volunteer and search and rescue, EMT, wildland firefighter, and mountain guide. James will discuss a wide range of paranormal activity in the Columbia River Gorge in Washington State, including the Klickitat, ape, cat, Sasquatch, UFOs, portals, and small humanoids.
Yeah.
Can we
So,
please welcome James to the show? Hello there.
hello. Great to see you again.
Thank you. It's nice to speak to you again after a couple of years.
Yeah,
So,
it's been a
what's
while.
been happening since you were last on the show?
Well, just to give your viewers a little bit of a summary of my situation. So about 4 years ago, my mother-in-law passed away, and we inherited some of her businesses in the Columbia River Gorge. And the Columbia River Gorge is in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. It separates, it's the southern boundary of Washington State and Oregon. And it is the largest river that flows into the Pacific Ocean in both North and South America. And where Margie was my mother-in-law, where stores are located is dead center in the Columbia River Gorge. This is about an 80-mile stretch of the river that runs directly through the Cascade Mountains. And it is a jaw-droppingly beautiful place where you go from basically sea level to 3,000 feet in less than half a mile. The western half is a Pacific Northwest rainforest, moody and brooding and mysterious. The eastern half is a high plains desert created by the rain shadow of the mountains, and it's austere and beautiful and almost spiritual. From a natural perspective, it is a geologic wonder, and we have 3 stratovolcanoes over 10,000 feet here within 35 miles of the store. Where there are hundreds of caves, lava tube caves in the area. We have the highest concentration of waterfalls anywhere in America, and some of them are close to 600 feet tall. And it is, an area with cliffs and mountains, and people go whitewater rafting and rock climbing and windsurfing. I mean, it really is an adventurous paradise. And the stores that we inherited, one of them we sort of morphed into an outdoor adventure store. And out of lark, I put a Sasquatch in the logo, a Bigfoot in our logo. It's called Margie's Outdoor Store. And right away, people started coming in and telling us all these remarkable stories about the strange experiences they were having in the area around the store, in the wilderness area. And so we put up a big sign in the window that said, "File your paranormal reports here." It's a little over 3 years ago that we did this. And now we're at over 400 reports. And this includes, everything from Sasquatch encounters, UFO sightings. We have pictures of these things, footprints, hair samples. People come in and talk about experiences with ghosts and all kinds of just astonishing phenomenon. And part of the reason for our success, part of the reason why we have had so many reports, is that from the very beginning, I wanted us to be a safe place where ordinary people could talk about extraordinary experiences. I know that one of the biggest impediments to people talking about extraordinary experiences they personally had is the stigma associated with it. They're afraid of being told they're crazy, or they're stupid, or they're gullible, or whatever. And I was, I'm not a scientist. I wasn't really concerned with getting accurate data to the point of, if someone came in and told me a tall tale, fine, whatever. I mean, it's almost like a social experiment in some ways. But really, when you look at the data, for instance, there was a guy, Dr. John Brown out of Harvard, and he studied people who said that they had had alien abduction experiences. This was like back in the 80s and 90s, I think. And what he determined was that these people, they did studies. He had colleagues check them to see if they were crazy or they had some type of psychological disorder that would indicate that they were fabricating these experiences. And none of them, out of the several hundred people that he interviewed, none of them had the markers for any kind of mental illness that would indicate that they were fabricating things, no schizophrenia and things like that. A few of them did have PTSD. And so when I read that study, I thought, people can have extraordinary experiences. Our culture imposes, if they're unusual, imposes a layer of disbelief on top of it. And so it's really hard when you have a corner case, when you're in a situation that is not common, for people to believe you. And so when you look at what's happened in the US, now that the military has lifted sort of the stigma of reporting UFO encounters or UAP encounters, we have many more military aviators, pilots, and people who work in the aircraft reporting really unusual lights in the sky and encounters with strange craft that seem to exhibit very exotic flight characteristics. And so what we wanted to do was create this safe place. I wanted it to be a place where I was personally curious because of some experiences that I'd had, but also to sort of see what would happen, what we would get. I had no idea that literally hundreds of people would trust me with these stories. Some folks have come in, they tell me that I'm the second person they've told in 20 years. The first person might have been a friend or a relative. Told them they were crazy or they were on drugs. And then they just shut up about it. But they never forgot the sovereignty, the reality of what they had witnessed firsthand. And so often we want to normalize what we have experienced if it's unusual, or what someone else tells us they've experienced. And it's a natural defense mechanism. It's an extremely human response to anomalous information, right? Like, life is hard enough. You don't need, giant black cats running around, or Sasquatch, or, who knows what UFOs really are. That becomes like difficult to integrate into a world model if you have no experience with it. And so we all want to make it something that we understand. But I thought, what would happen if we treated everyone who came in with dignity and respect? What would happen if we asked intelligent follow-up questions? Like, whatever they were telling us, we assumed was a real experience. And we said, okay, if what you're saying is true, here's my next question. We're going to extend faith in your story. And it has been incredibly rewarding in ways that I couldn't have imagined when we started. These connections with people has been amazing. And so that's just a little bit of the context of who I am and why I'm here talking about this kind of stuff. Is this, I'm sort of the epicenter of all of these reports in this really unusual area. The gorge is sparsely populated. We're talking about an area of easily over probably 4,000 square miles. Right. And there's like 70,000 people that live here. When Margie passed away, we were living up in Seattle where there are 4,000 people per square mile. Here, there are 10 in the built up areas, and in the wilderness areas, there are none. And so the question really comes, like, why is this place so over indexing on reports of strange or unusual phenomena? Mm-hmm. Like, you would expect that fewer people, you get fewer reports. And of course, I've got a place where people can come, Margie's Outdoor Store, and tell their stories. And so that's part of it. But still, like 400 reports in 4 years, that's like a new Scooby-Doo mystery walking through our door every couple of 3-4 days. Yeah. And so there's something about this place that really has captured my curiosity. Why is this place why is there such a concentration of reports? It's not just since I've been here. Way back in the 1960s, on the Washington side of the Columbia River, the northern side of the river, there are two counties. there's Klickitat County, where my stores are located. Klickitat is an Indian Native American name, and Skamania County, which is where my home is. I drive about 25 minutes to work every day to this just jaw-droppingly beautiful place. And way back in the 1960s, Skamania County was the first governmental body in the world to enact Bigfoot protection legislation. And Skamania County is a Sasquatch sanctuary. If you kill a Sasquatch here in Skamania County, you'll be charged with manslaughter. And so it is a very real part of the culture here. And for decades, we've had people coming to Mount Adams, which is a stratovolcano about 35 miles north of my store.
Yeah.
I think it's around 1,200 feet tall, because UFOs have been sighted around that since the 1940s. And people come from all over the world to see strange craft fly around that mountain. And so this is just a truly remarkable place filled with mystery. Hopefully we'll have some time to talk about something that I'm kind of excited about. It looks like we may have found evidence for an advanced ancient civilization here in the gorge.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. And we also might want to talk about this. We've had over 130 reports of enormous Black Panther creatures here in the gorge. Some of them have been seen by police officers. Some of them have, everyone describes this very large, muscular cat. Of course, we have cougars out here, but science doesn't recognize them ever as being black. They're not melanistic cats. And so of these very muscular cougars, about half of the reports say that these black furred creatures with long tails are enormous in size, up to 4 to 5 feet tall, shoulder, weighing anywhere between 800 and 1,300 pounds. And then there's a handful of the reports that talk about them having faces that look something like a monkey. It's a giant mystery here. It's one of the most compelling mysteries that I've found. And the interesting thing about that is these are creatures that quite possibly could have escaped from the animal testing laboratory at the Hanford nuclear site, which is just upriver from us.
All right.
And as astonishing as that sounds, it turns out to be the most rational explanation for why we have so many reports of giant black cats running around in the Columbia River Gorge. So I think the question is where do you want to start?
Exactly. What's so special about the gorge then? I know there's so many hotspots around the world where things happen for a certain, you seem to you just go to this spot and you think, my God, there's so much happening here at the moment. And then more things happen. And then lots of people want to come and see it then. We've got a place called Bempton. It's a bird sanctuary in the UK on the northeast coast. But there's lots of different activity there. Another hotspot. And I've seen the Black Panther as well, coming away from there one night in 2017. Where did that come from?
Yeah. One of the things about the gorge is its geology makes it one of the most unique electromagnetic environments in the world. And part of that has to do with, we had these, 15 million years ago, these enormous lava flows that came through here, basically battling with the river. And they came from this enormous fissure that opened in the earth. It was 100 miles long at the Idaho-Washington border. And so much lava came out of this thing that it actually poured down the ancient Columbia River Valley 300 miles all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But it happened in a number of different eruptive events. And so there's this layer cake of all these different lavas. And each one of those lavas has a unique magnetic signature for reasons that are kind of complicated to explain. And so because of that, this place and the Cascade Mountains that came up and buckled and folded all those unique magnetic layers has created this really unusual magnetic environment. When you look at the government navigation maps here, There are bright pink letters on them that warn you that your compass readings will be off when you're navigating through the gorge. I've been up in the mountainous area, in some of the areas where there are lava bed flows and these lava tube caves. And I'm as you mentioned at the beginning, very experienced outdoorsman. As an infantry soldier with the U.S. Army, wildland forest firefighter, mountain guide, and a nationally certified search and rescue EMT, I have been conducting life and death professional land navigation since I was 19 years old. And I really know my way around in the wilderness. And there are places up there where you take your compass and you put it close to the rocks and the compass just bends away from north. So all that is to say that there is things going on here electromagnetically that are different from most places. The reason why that's interesting is back in the 80s and 90s, up in Ontario, Canada, at Laurentide University, a professor by the name of Dr. Michael Persinger did a number of studies about how magnetic fields can influence the human brain and perception. He created a helmet that he could control magnetic fields with some solenoids on it. It's basically a motorcycle helmet. And as he adjusted these different magnetic fields around human brains, people reported having paranormal-like experiences. And so people would report a sense of presence. They would report, in fact, a couple people reported meeting God, which is how this thing got the name of the God helmet in the media. But a whole range of paranormal experiences people were having, and he could repeatedly induce these experiences within people by adjusting magnetic fields. We now know that there's a mechanism in our brain by which that works. Our brains are literally packed with billions of magnetite crystals. This is the most magnetically reactive substance on Earth. And they're housed in these things called magnetosomes. They're like sheath-like structures that stack up the magnetic crystals. And they are laid on top of brain cells, mostly in the temporal lobes and hippocampus. And they torque when they are under magnetic influences. And so they create a physical mechanism in the brain.
Right.
We know that this is how animals can navigate over long distances with a magnetosense. Like they are literally, their brains have physical mechanisms that are magnetically controlled. Those same mechanisms are in our brain, and we know that they can induce these paranormal-like perceptions. What I think is happening here in the gorge is people come here and they encounter electromagnetic fields that they don't normally encounter in other places. And this has an influence on their brain, and they begin perceiving things that they don't normally perceive. So a fair question then becomes, so are these just like electromagnetic hallucinations? Like, is it no different from like being on drugs or something like that, where you are perceiving things that aren't actually there? Well, the problem with that theory is that we have things like footprints and hair samples. We have photographs of glowing orbs and UAPs and UFOs from the area. I've seen them with my own eyes, and I've taken pictures of them myself. And then we also have a number of situations that are co-witnessed, where you might have 8 witnesses reporting the exact same phenomenon. And so if it was a local hallucination in someone's personal brain, you wouldn't expect 8 people to have the exact same experience.
True.
So what does that mean? Like, what could possibly be happening? And the analogy that I've been that makes sense for me, that seems like it might explain how these things are related, is think about like an old school radio. Like if your car had a radio in it and you didn't know that you could change the channel.
Yeah.
And every time that you got into your car and turned it on, you heard talk radio. In fact, if all of your family members, their radio was stuck on the same channel, everyone in your community would believe, okay, whenever you're doing this activity, driving your car, you hear talk radio, that's reality, that's the way it is. But then if someday somebody came in and slightly adjusted your electromagnetic tuner, your radio, you wouldn't hear talk radio. You might hear classical music or rock and roll music. or some other type of programming.
Yeah.
Now, those signals were always present in the environment, right? It's just that you weren't calibrated or tuned to receive them. And so I think what happens when you get into the gorge is that this electromagnetic environment alters your tuning mechanism through these magnetosomes in your brain and allows you to perceive things that you don't normally perceive. It seems weird when you say, oh, like there's part of the world that we don't perceive, but no one questions the idea that your dog can hear and smell things that you can't smell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it may be that this is something similar. The human experience is a very narrow band of reality. Like there's only so much in the visible spectrum of light that we can see. There's only so much in the spectrum of sound that we can see. And so there may be something like that that's happening. Again, I'm not a scientist, but for me, that's an easy way to understand how the environment may be interacting with the biomechanics of our bodies and helping us to experience things here that we don't normally experience.
I'm going to say, because you can go to some places and you can sense it.
Yes,
you can
and these places in
yourself.
England that you're talking about may have a similar electromagnetic effect.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I've been to places and I think something's going to happen tonight. I can feel it. I can feel some sort of energy around me. And then these orange lights appear in the sky. You think, but they're telling me something, It just makes you wonder. It's like ley lines and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of places.
And electromagnetism has a profound impact on our physiology in other ways. And, the sun is always, we've got a magnetosphere surrounding the Earth, and solar weather can impact that. It's really easy to imagine that being sensitive to electromagnetic fields can have very important survival value, right? And so the fact that these systems are in our bodies already, part of like the operating system, it's just they're not well studied or well understood currently, to me is really a fascinating way to think about why sometimes you have experiences or why certain places seem to be more active than others. I kind of have the sense that, some places are better at adjusting our tuners and helping us to perceive things that
Hey, James, don't. What about you can be three of you up there and you might see something. Two of you see the same thing. The other one doesn't. See something entirely different.
Yeah, I think that there's also a component of, so it's easy to understand that if you eat or consume caffeine or something else, like your experience of the moment is going to be different than someone who didn't. Mm-hmm. And so depending on, what you ate, like who knows, like maybe if you ate a lot of bananas that day, your potassium levels would be different and your brain chemistry will be different than those who are near you, right? So like there can be individual variations. Some people's tuners might be more stuck than others. But also there's that process of normalization where some of us really don't want the world to be unusual. And so we talk ourselves out of certain experiences. There's a number of different ways I think it can happen. And again, I don't want to pretend that I'm a scientist who knows these things. I'm just a very curious person who's found himself in this extraordinary place and at the epicenter of all these different stories. And I'm trying to make sense of it with the best knowledge that I have.
Mount Adams seems to be a lot of activity around there over the years where UFOs have been seen quite often. I wonder why Mount Adams, why does it happen around there?
So America's love affair with UFOs really started in 1947. There was a very famous sighting by a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold. And he was flying a private plane over the Cascade Mountains. And he observed 9 craft. The media wound up calling them saucers, but they were flying at extremely high speed, faster than anything else at the time could fly, between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. And so that got picked up by the media, and it went all over America. And then July of that same year, the Roswell incident occurred. And after that, there's no looking back for American UFOs. But it is not the first time that UFOs are reported in America. So back during World War II, the Allies are terrified that the Nazis are going to unlock the secrets of the atom. And Einstein convinces President Roosevelt that we need to start a nuclear program. And everyone knows about Oppenheimer in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the engineers were designing the bomb. What most people don't know about is there was also a site in Washington state right along the Columbia River called Hanford. And this was the place where they built the world's first industrial scale nuclear reactor. And its purpose was to create the plutonium that would go into the atomic bombs. It was a super top secret project, but it was a gigantic project. Basically, they evicted all of the settlers and Native Americans who lived on the 600 square mile area of Washington state. It's sort of like a desert scabland area, a very remote. And they started building this facility, which would become the world's first nuclear reactor. Well, in January of 1945, right near Hanford, it was a naval air station, Pasco Naval Air Station. And they had a number of F-6F Hellcat fighter planes there. This was the most advanced Navy fighter plane at the time. It was a propeller plane. And I've listened to stories of pilots who were there and they got scrambled to intercept a glowing orange object over the Hanford nuclear site. You have to understand, at this time, the pilots had no idea what this site was. Only President Roosevelt and even the vice president of America didn't know what was going on there at the time. So this is a very small circle of people who know that they're actually using this site for. He gets deployed to intercept glowing orange objects over the Hanford site, and he's unable to capture them. This is right around the time that Hanford has actually forged plutonium for the first time and is now shipping it to Los Alamos. And then in July of that year, 1945, 2 years before the Kenneth Arnold sighting, 12 F-6F Hellcats get scrambled to intercept glowing objects over the reactor again. This is the same month that the Trinity test occurred. This is the test, was the first man-made atomic detonation in the history of the world. And those pilots go to intercept something that they describe as being as large as 3 aircraft carriers combined in the sky. It seemed to be able to create clouds as camouflage. And they're told to max out their plane's capabilities to try to catch the thing. Now, these F-6F Hellcat fighter planes, their operation ceiling maxed out at like 37,000 feet.
Yeah.
And they're told, we don't care if you blow your engines, glide home if you have to, but catch this thing. And they can't catch it. And so all the way back in 1945, at the birth of the atomic frontier, there are UFOs. And literally, you can see Mount Adams from Hanford. Like, it is, I've climbed Mount Adams. You can look down and see over this vast landscape, the river, and the Hanford site. So that's sort of where UFOs really got started in America, was right there by this Hanford nuclear site, one of the most important nuclear sites in American history. Because after the war, this thing went into overdrive during the Cold War, and they had 9 nuclear reactors running full tilt there. It eventually got the nickname the Apocalypse Factory because it had produced so much plutonium that it could have fueled 60,000 nuclear weapons.
Oh,
so, and obviously critically important from a strategic standpoint. Like, you couldn't find a more secure or important nuclear facility in America at the time. We used to have this system called the Nike missile system. Basically, they were surface-to-air missiles with a nuclear warhead. And the idea was, if Soviet bombers were coming over to bomb Hanford, it would be better to detonate a nuclear blast and take out those bombers over civilian populations rather than allow those bombers to hit Hanford. So that is sort of the level of insane Cold War thinking that was going on at the time. And while most sites in America had one or maybe two of these Nike missile installations, Hanford had four. So like this place was by far super critical. It's the place where we, as humans, first forged an element that doesn't occur in nature on Earth, and that's plutonium. So there's a lot of speculation that that history is part of why there is this UFO, sort of phenomenon occurring in our area. And interestingly, like I said earlier, that Hanford nuclear site may explain why we've got all of these sightings of these enormous black cats out here. So it's fascinating stuff. And I'd be happy to go into that story if you want me to.
Yeah. Another thing is there seems to be a lot of reports about Sasquatch in the gorge, commonly known as the nickname the Monster Mountain.
Yeah. So there's an area, it's really just like a 15-minute drive from the store. On most maps, it's called the Monte Cristo Natural Preserve. It's sort of a mountain range within a mountain range. The Cascades are vast. They are like easily 80,000 square miles of like just rugged expedition class wilderness. And within that, there are multiple smaller ranges and things like that. Yeah. Just to give your listeners a sense of scope and scale, you could fit 10 of the United States inside the landmass of the Cascade Mountain Range. Oh, so it is huge area and incredibly remote. And this is a place where, like people say, well, why can't they just go out and find it? There are places where you get out here and you just see ridgeline after ridgeline after ridgeline of forest. It is like you're looking at an ocean of trees. Oh, yeah. And the only human accessibility are these thin ribbons of humanity in the form of like Forest Service roads, thousands of miles of them. But they're really difficult. Like once you get off of those places, like you are in some of the most rugged and remote terrain on Earth. And like I said, as a former search and rescue EMT who's been on scores of missions, like there are a few places in the world that are more difficult to traverse. And the notion that creatures could be hiding out here and unrecognized by science or uncaptured is really plausible once you actually see just how vast this wilderness area is. And one of the really, so we do have this long tradition of Bigfoot. And one of the areas where that is focused is on one of the mountains in Washington State called Mount St. Helens. People may know of Mount St. Helens because in May of 1980, it erupted. And it was such a massive eruption that it was equal to 1,600 Hiroshima bombs. And it devastated over 230 square miles of wilderness and sent up a mushroom cloud that was extended 12 feet into the air. Well, so when that occurred, numerous parts of the wilderness area around there were devastated. And the military came in to help with cleanup efforts. Part of it was there was animal carcasses strewn everywhere, right? And so that happened in 1980. And I was stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State, probably maybe 100 miles north of the gorge, back in 1988. And, as a young soldier, I was on base, and some of the older soldiers would tell stories about how they were deployed on a security detail. So I was in the infantry. We were the kind of guys that carried machine guns and, walked across the battlefield like we are the point of the spear. And so the types of jobs that we did were security. And so they would tell these stories about how after Mount St. Helens blew, they got deployed to Mount St. Helens and they were pulling security on these camps and that were collecting animal carcasses. And there were piles of Sasquatch carcasses there. And some of them would get lifted up by, the giant double propped Chinook helicopters and nets and be carried away. And some of them told stories. And you got to understand, as a young soldier, soldiers lie to each other and tell stories all the time. We're always playing jokes on each other. Like as a young private, I got sent out to the motor pool to get a can of squelch for the radio. Obviously, doesn't exist, or a box of grid squares for the map. And so, you're always getting your leg pulled. And I was hearing these stories, and one of the stories sort of went like, yeah, we were driving around in these deuce-and-a-half trucks on these mountain roads, and we'd get to like a cave entrance, and then a Sasquatch would hop out of the back of the truck and converse with some person in a sort of a lab coat kind of a person. And he would go into the caves and he would holler, and then they would either bring out the carcasses of dead Sasquatch or very badly burned Sasquatches from these things. And, when you're 19 years old and you're hearing this stuff, you're like, yeah, cool story, bro, whatever. Like, certain that you're being lied to. Like, there's like, how could this possibly be true? And so I've come down to the gorge now. It's 30 years later. I'm in my 50s. And we're getting all these reports of Sasquatch, and I'm doing research. I'm like, is this true? And there's many, many stories of Bigfoot on this in the wilderness areas around Mount St. Helens. And just for reference, Mount St. Helens is maybe 50 miles from my store. You can see it if you get high enough.
Yeah.
And so I come across a document through a Freedom of Information Act request, and it's called the Washington Environmental Atlas. It's a document that was produced in 1975. So this is 5 years before Mount St. Helens erupted. And what it was the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They did a study of Washington State, and their job was to catalog all of the natural and cultural phenomenon there. So like, what is the geology of Washington State like? And there are maps showing, where different rocks are and minerals are, and where mines are located. What plant life lives here? So describing all of the trees, and then also a section on the cultural history. So where are there archaeological sites of Native American activity? And there's also a section on the animals that live in Washington State.
Ooh.
Very comprehensive. And I think it's on page 43 or 45. There's an entry for Sasquatch, and it describes the creature, and it has maps of its habitat. And there are, markers on Mount St. Helens. There are markers also on Monster Mountain, where we in the store are getting reports of these creatures. And it's remarkable to me that as I'm taking in these reports, and we've had hundreds of Sasquatch reports in the store, and I'm mapping them on my own maps. Yeah. They are tracking with this map that was produced in this document way back in 1975. And then for some reason, that document was veiled behind some secrecy, and it was only through a Freedom of Information Act that we were able to get access to it. And if your viewers want to find it, you can just look up Washington Environmental Atlas, Army Corps of Engineers, and they'll be able to find it. I mean, it's a PDF that you can read yourself. And so to me, like, here's a really interesting intersection between my personal history of both being a soldier, hearing these stories, and then being a store owner here in the Gorge and hearing more stories and mapping those locations, and then finding this government document that is very clear. And it makes reference. It says, some people say this is a mythological legendary creature, and that you should not include a legendary creature in a document about the actual flora and fauna of Washington State. And yet there's the entry for this creature, right? And so it's a really fascinating thing. And, we see this, we get dozens and dozens of reports. This past 2 weeks ago, there were a group of folks that came out looking for Squatch in the Monte Cristo area. I went out and chatted with them, and they told me about some of their experiences, and they were hearing, some of them saw what appeared to be a juvenile, and they heard a hooting and tree knocking. There's also petroglyphs on the walls in this area that look like Bigfoot, and they have footprints on the walls, like it's part of the ancient history of this place.
It sounds very interesting. What about, you've seen several reports about short bipedal humanoids in the gorge?
Yeah, that's a part of the history out here as well. You know, there are many reports in the Native American ethnology of small humanoids, and we get some of these reports in the store as well. So the Native Americans say that humanoids, perfectly formed people, no more than 24 inches tall, 18 to 24 inches tall, were actually the authors of many of the petroglyphs that are found, particularly on the desert walls out here. And what's kind of interesting about that is they say that these beings would come out and they had clothing made of woven rabbit fur, and they would actually draw the petroglyphs. And there are places where you can go and within a span of 100 yards see 40 or 50 different petroglyphs. I mean, it is a remarkable thing. One of my employees had an astonishing experience. And, you know, I've, like I said, talked to hundreds of different people. And after a while, there are some people who you want to evaluate their truthfulness, right? Is this person pulling my leg? You know, what's the people that you know well, like my employees, who I have a history with, who I understand their communication patterns, you know, to me, they're high veracity witnesses because they have no reason to lie to me. And, you know, like when you know somebody, you know if they're pulling your leg or not. One of my employees was driving home from work late at night. It was past 1:00 a.m. in the desert areas. And he saw a being standing on the side of the road. It was no taller than the hood of his car, thin, spindly limbs, bipedal. And he said that it had a head that looked something like a praying mantis. And that's sounds like different than some of these Native American legends. As he passed it, and he only saw it for a few seconds in the headlight. It was no taller than the hood of his car. And the console lights in his vehicle went dead. And then his phone started going crazy, and like alarms started going off and stuff like that. He got a couple of yards down the road, a couple of 100 yards down the road, and he himself started feeling dizzy and strange. He stopped the car and wondered if he should go back, and because he knew I'd be interested in hearing what he had encountered. And then he said, "Hell no, I'm not going back there. I don't care what James wants to know. It's not worth it." And interestingly, he said that in that same area, on several other nights before, at least on 5 different occasions, he had seen owls, you know, standard, you know, like desert owls, standing in the road at that exact same location. And so there's this very, like when we look at petroglyphs, we see those owls in the petroglyphs. They're important enough to be recorded in the rock. And so, yeah, and we have many other tales similar to that, where people are seeing what appear to be just small humans, tiny people in the forests and the deserts of the area. That's one that, you know, it's hard for me to wrap my head around and try to understand exactly what that phenomena is about. So, yeah, fascinating stuff.
Well, it is. Do you think portals open up then, and these beings or whatever they are can manage to come out and then go back into them?
That seems to be part of the stories that we hear. Now, on Mount Adams, there's a place just sort of at the foot of Mount Adams called ESETI Ranch. It stands for Enlightened Communication with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And for decades, James Gilliland has been inviting people out to his property. They come from all over the world. Many people come as skeptics and they leave believers. And they see craft flying around the mountain frequently. And we have reports of other people who've lived in the area for years who see these lights flying around the mountain themselves. Oftentimes they see aircraft that are in the U.S. military inventory chasing these things. Now, there's a video that James has where there is this pyramidal like light structure that appears on the mountainside. And they think that this is a portal to another dimension, a dimension of higher planar existence.
Yeah.
They have, I have some friends who are remote viewers. Remote viewing is a technique developed by the CIA. It's basically psychic spy stuff where you can use your mind to explore places and sort of get useful intelligence. And it is highly effective and verifiable outside of, it's sort of like, basically what they're doing at the beginning of that show, Stranger Things, with the little girl 11, trying to get her to view a Russian guy somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, when they view this pyramid structure, they don't know what they're looking at. They just said, okay, here's your target number. What do you see? They start to give some very unusual reports. And normally when they're given a target that has something to do with a UFO or pictures of UFOs, they'll come back with terms like craft or vehicle or ship, something like that. When they view this thing and the lights around this, what they're calling a portal, they get words like chariot, like archaic words, and words like vimana, which is the Sanskrit word for the flying vehicles in the Indian tradition. So basically they say that there is this portal to another world that's guarded by these almost angelic figures. Some of them take the form of feline humanoids.
Right.
And they are protecting this gateway to another dimension on Mount Adams. So that's like one of the stories of portals. And there's definitely, people have reported things flying into these portals and coming out of these portals, this pyramidal shaped portal on Mount Adams. We've had other reports in the desert. A guy thought he was driving through the desert and he thought what he saw was the lights of an Indian casino. As he got close to it, he realized, no, this is actually a portal. And so your listeners have a sense. When people describe portals, they typically say, well, it's like a almost circular shape floating in the air. Floating is not exactly the word, like positioned in the air.
Yeah. And
the background in that opening looks different than the background all around it. And this one gentleman reported to me that he saw a black cube come out of one of these portals and then fly down the gorge. And so it seems like we have those kind of stories. And then we also have really unusual stories of one-off cryptids. A young girl reported to me, in fact, it was my daughter. We were driving my 4x4 up in the mountains and we had to pull off to let another vehicle pass. And she said, oh, there's a snake outside. I said, yeah, it's a big, long yellow snake, about 4 feet long. And it's got frills, red frills on the side of its head that fade down to yellow.
Yeah.
And I thought, tell me again about this snake with the frills. And she was very clear. She was probably 9 years old when she saw it. And the thing is, there are no snakes with frills in their head anywhere in the world. No. And we have a number of reports like that where there are these sort of one-off cryptids that no one has ever heard of before, no one's ever described to my knowledge before, that seem to be in abundance here. And so whether it's this electromagnetic thing or we're at some type of interdimensional crossroads where things can come and go, I really don't know. All I can tell you is what the reports that I'm hearing are and how they make sense or don't make sense with other things that we've heard.
But like you say that, I know for a fact one lad has seen up where we are now, he saw a dog coming out of it, quite a big dog with like a human face on it. And he was waiting at a bus stop for a bus coming and he thought, what the hell is that?
Yeah. You know, one of the really interesting things about these ape cat sightings. We call it the ape cat because there are a handful of reports that say this creature has a face that looks like a man. What's interesting is that in some Native American traditions, there are these creatures called Meshepeshu. They are a race of what they call them is a race of supernatural underwater panther protectors.
Right.
Basically, when Native Americans talk about something being from the underwater realm or the sky realm or the earth realm, they're talking about something that has 1 foot in our physical reality and 1 foot in the spirit world.
Yeah.
And they're described as black panthers with the face of a man, which to me is really interesting because it's tracking along with what a small percentage of the reports we have about these big black cats are. And so that's one lead where there's an intersection between these traditional stories that are mixed with experiences of the spirit realm and what we're hearing, what's actually being reported in current modern day. Interestingly, there are petroglyphs in the desert that depict these cat-like faces with wavy water lines underneath them. And I believe that they're trying to tell us something about this race of underwater panther protectors that have faces that look like humans. Again, it's so outside of our realm of understanding that the mind searches for explanations that are more mundane or somehow make sense with what we know. And the really amazing thing about for me, that these Klickitat ape cat. Klickitat is the Native American name for the Mount Adams. We have all these reports. Senior law enforcement officers have seen them. We've seen people have reported them with kittens and cubs, so we know it's reproducing out here. The reports go back all the way to 1968, at least has been reported in my store. And as I was trying to find answers, like how could it be that there are enormous black cats running around the Columbia River Gorge? There's only one big black cat in the Americas. It's the black jaguar, but its range is 1,000 miles south of where we are. No one is expecting to see black cats in the Pacific Northwest. So why are we getting so many reports of this? And some people this thing was as tall as my Ford Escort car. This thing was, when it leapt across the road, its body stretched from the white line through the 2 yellow lines to the white line on the other side. That's 14 to 16 feet long. So that is big. Are utterly enormous. And so how could that be? And I stumbled upon, and so I knew that there was this nuclear facility upriver, and I thought maybe something has, and it's now, the site was closed down in the late 80s. And it's now like America's biggest Superfund cleanup site because it is one of the most toxic environments on Earth. Not only is there radioactive water stored in leaking containers out there, but there are all of these crazy chemicals that are known mutagens that there was used in part of the stripping process to extract the plutonium. And it's been a site of strange science for decades and decades and decades. I thought, I wonder, maybe these are mutated creatures. They got too close or got exposed to this radiation, and they somehow are now running around in the gorge. And then I found an article in a newspaper that described, as during the cleanup activities, buried in the desert, they found a railroad boxcar that was filled with animal carcasses, half-burned animal carcasses that were radioactively hot. And so I was like, what in the hell is that about? Who buries a boxcar of radioactive half-burned animal carcasses in the desert? And why would you even do that? And why would you have so many that you could fill up an entire boxcar?
God, bloody hell.
So I dug into it, and I really started researching this Hanford nuclear site. And it turns out that since day one, they had an animal testing program. And at the beginning, way back when it was top secret, before the UFOs, before everything.
Yeah.
When they first spun up this Hanford nuclear site, they had an animal testing program. And the guy that they put in charge of it was a guy named Dr. Lorne Donaldson from the University of Washington. His only academic achievement before getting this posting was that he had actually created a super animal. It's called the Donaldson super trout. It is a fish that is 8 times larger and stronger than a normal trout. It can survive in freshwater and saltwater. It reaches sexual maturity in half the time. Super strong and super survivable. And this is the guy that they picked to run the animal testing program at Hanford from the beginning. And you have to understand the context of the 1930s and 40s. We didn't know much about radiation, but we did know that it could induce mutations. And the Nazis are into, super soldier and super animal programs. They had actually resurrected an extinct Ice Age creature called the aurochs and populated a forest in Poland with them. And so the Russians were trying to create human chimpanzee hybrids to become super soldiers, humanzees. And so they were trying to artificially inseminate chimpanzees with human genetic material to create animal hybrids. And so at the time, not only were they fearful that the Nazis would get the bomb first, but what would happen if the Nazis figured out how to use radiation to mutate things and create super soldiers, right?
Yeah.
So we win the war. They announce that Hanford's a thing. It kind of becomes public for a brief flash. And then the Soviets start scooping up Nazi scientists. So America starts scooping up Nazi scientists through a thing called Operation Paperclip.
Yeah, they did.
And then they close it. They sort of like put the secrecy back over Hanford. And then the animal testing laboratory during the Cold War goes into overdrive. And it expands to the point where they can house 1,000 large animals there at a time. And they're doing insane, crazy tests. Like literally, I have found interviews with people who worked there, who were lab technicians, who said, yes, my boss was a Nazi. And, he talks about his Nazi war experiences. And they said, and he was doing dental implant experiments on macaque monkeys that were so strong they could pull eye bolts out of the walls that were chained to the wall, cement walls. And these creatures were super smart, and they would often get the better of the lab workers and, conk them on the head and knock them out and do different things to them. Well, so this Donaldson guy winds up going to the South Pacific. He's a part of like all those crazy Bikini Atoll tests and disastrous Castle Bravo tests, those nuclear tests out there. A new guy comes in. His name is Bill Baer. He's in charge of the life sciences program at Hanford. And they are doing just unbelievable experiments. And I found several interviews where he discusses how they were doing radiation experiments on apex predators. Those predators escaped and they couldn't recapture them. And so he tells a story about how they had, 30 alligators. And he holds up a picture of the device they used to irradiate these alligators with. He says, yes, we were doing experiments on them. And then one night, 6 of these experimental irradiated apex predators outsmarted the scientists and escaped into the Columbia River. And because they were worried that civilians would find these things, they put out a press release. And so there's historical documentation along with the 3 videotaped interviews of this guy talking about these animals escaping. And they had a security team that went out every day for 6 months to try to hunt these things down. And they only ever captured 4 of them. And so there were still 2 of them out there. And they figured, well, it's January. These things are never going to survive the winter. And so we could call off the hunt. But these creatures are swimming literally in the effluvium, the cooling water that came through the reactor. And they would pump into the gorge. And he said in these interviews that even into the 80s, he was getting reports, he was getting questions from fish and wildlife guys asking if he knew anything about alligators in Colombia. And he just said no and hung up on him and laughs about it. So the question is you can understand during the Cold War when we know very little about radiation and everyone's worried about an atomic bomb dropping, what would happen to our food supply? Like we need to know if a cow eats grass that has radioactive fallout on it, is its milk safe to drink?
Yeah.
Like what happens to our food supply? And so a lot of the tests they're doing is on things like that. Makes sense. Like that's food security for a nation. But why in the hell are you studying alligators in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah,
There's no reason Like they're not part of our food chain. We don't make clothing out of them. You know, they're not any part of security. And so why would they be doing that? Why would they be experimenting on apex predators? And what does that have to do with cats? You know, that's, you know, kind of the other question in the back of my mind. Well, before I tell you about any of that, I have to explain to you a little bit about dolphins. So since the 1950s, the US government has used dolphins to guard some of our most sensitive nuclear sites. And the reason why is many of our nuclear sites are on waterways, which are very difficult from a security perspective. Like if you had a Soviet scuba diver coming in at night, swimming through the water, nearly impossible to detect. Even sonar wouldn't tell you, like, is that a tuna fish? Is that a sea lion? Like, you have no idea.
I wouldn't.
But you can train a dolphin to tell the difference. And they would rig these dolphins up with this special apparatus on their snout. It was like a grabber claw. And that claw would grab onto the diver, and a balloon would inflate and bring the diver to the surface, and then the atomic security forces would scoop him up. A dead diver at the bottom of the ocean tells you nothing. You want to gather as much intelligence from his gear, equipment, and whatever he's carrying. And so the dolphin program is extremely successful. I think I said that a quarter of the U.S. nuclear stockpile is currently guarded by dolphins. It's a big deal, especially from a security perspective. And Hanford is our most important nuclear security concern, right? Like if you want to guard anything, it has to be that. But Hanford has a 90-mile or 45 miles of the Columbia River that run right through the middle of it. It's part of the cooling systems for the reactors.
Yeah.
That's 90 miles of river coastline that you need to guard. Very difficult security task. So you would obviously be aware that they're about the dolphin program. The dolphin program is extremely successful in the nuclear security program. Wouldn't it be great if we could bring dolphins into the Columbia River? You can't, because the Columbia River is freshwater. Dolphins only operate in saltwater. So you're going to ask yourself a really simple question. If we were to create a sentinel creature like a dolphin, what's the world's best riverine hunter? What creature is perfectly adapted for hunting in a river environment? You might look at alligators, but you would absolutely look at jaguars. Jaguars are the apex predators of the Pantanal River area down in Central America. These are creatures that can hold their breath for 15 minutes. They can swim a kilometer in the open ocean. They can eat underwater. They have night vision that's 6 times better than a human being. They can kill alligators with a single bite to the back of the head. And as a bonus, they always instinctively drag their prey to shore. So this would have been the absolute perfect base creature for if you were trying to create a hybrid or a special sentinel creature that could guard your nuclear facility. This would be your champ, right? Like this would be where you would start for sure. Like it's the best of the best creatures to start with. And at this time in America was the time when the first liger was born, which is a combination lion-tiger. And so the idea of interbreeding big cat species was a part of what was going on at the time. And in fact, so this is like the cat that people are describing is enormous, 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, 900 to 1,100 pounds. That's a giant creature. Nice. And you have to ask yourself, James, you got a great theory here, but is there any evidence that a cat could actually even be that big? And it turns out that nothing living is like, there's no tiger. Tigers are the biggest cats in the world. No tigers are that big. But there was a creature that lived in North America, in the American West, during the Ice Age, called the American lion. Its scientific name is the Panthera atrox. And this is really well known in the fossil record. And this creature is between 9 and 1,100 pounds and is 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder. And so we know that it is genetically possible for these creatures to have existed. Or for cats to be this big and alongside humans. Like it's in the recent history. This is like 10,000 years ago. So what we think happened was this Hanford nuclear site had a sentinel program where they were manipulating big cats, probably starting with the jaguar as a base cat. Those cats, like the alligators, outsmarted the scientists and escaped. And once they escaped, there was no catching them. And if you look at where Hanford is in relationship to where the gorge is, if you go north, east, or south, it's just scabland desert. But if you head, west into Klickitat County, where all of these sightings are, Klickitat County and Skamania County, you get this wonderful, lush habitat with multiple food sources and great cover and all these caves and everything else. And these reports are starting for us in the 1960s. And so, I think that if you're looking for a rational explanation, if you're not evoking supernatural UFO cat people or, Native American spirit animals, the idea that it may have escaped from a nuclear animal testing laboratory, secret animal testing laboratory, turns out to be the most rational and logical explanation for why we have so many crazy reports going on out here about these big black cats.
I know Mason just wrote something in chat room. Have you heard about the big cat spotted in New York State?
I have heard something about that. They're different in a few ways. The cats we have out here, or being reported in my store, I should say, are enormous. And so about 50% of our reports, all of them describe black fur, muscular build, long black tail. About 50% of them say as big as the biggest cougar you've ever seen, but 50% of them say enormous, like this giant size, bigger than any cat living today. And then a handful of reports say a face that looks like a monkey, which is often described as a flattened snout. So, normally get a nice prominent nose for a cat, this more flattened, intelligent ape-like eyes and other primate features. And so I'm aware that there are reports of big black cats in Florida. And also I haven't heard in New York State specifically. I do know that there is the beast of Bodmin Moor over in your stretch of the woods, on your side of the lake. And it's one of the mysteries that, and there is some discussion in some UFO circles about, they call them BACs, big alien cats. Black cats apparently are part of the UFO literature as well. So it remains a mystery, and I kind of love that. I like living in a place where we don't have all the answers yet. And
I know in the UK, I think, I can't remember, it was 72 or 76, the act came out where you wasn't allowed to have any animal at home what should be in the zoo. So a lot of people just took the cats, took them to a forest and just let them go.
Yeah. So it's an enduring mystery. And, that's, I think, one of the things that has made this experience for me so joyful and satisfying. I mean, there's a real sense of wonder of living in a place where all the mysteries don't have neat answers. And, that's a part of this experience that I think there's a real lesson in. When you approach the unknown with a sense of curiosity and wonder, the world becomes a magical place. It's a place where your fear can be replaced with curiosity. And, we have people say, well, aren't you worried about, being abducted or, being attacked or whatever? And sure, that's maybe a risk, but, life is filled with risks. And wouldn't you rather live in an interesting, almost enchanted world where these amazing things that most people aren't sure if they're real? When I stopped knowing for sure that these people must be making up these stories, that this Bigfoot story can't be real, this cat story can't be real, that this UFO story is obviously BS. When I took my ego out of that moment and I said, I'm just going to listen to the story. I'm not going to inject what I think that they saw on the story. I'm not going to tell them that they're crazy just because I haven't seen anything like it myself. I'm just going to take in the stories. And after 400 stories, you start to see patterns. After 400 stories, you understand that not all these people are fools or liars or hoaxers or idiots, that there's a reality going on out here. And, but it takes stepping back from what you think what you're certain about the world, and allowing there to be a space where something else might be happening. And really, that's life becomes so much more satisfying and interesting when you don't know the answers, when there's something out there, when there's mysteries to be solved, when there's research to be done, and you can find a deeper connection with people rather than dismissing them as fools or liars or hoaxsters. And to be sure, there are people that are obviously coming in and are, having fun with it, and that's, great, whatever. I mean, someone signed their report, Seymour Butts, and I'm like, okay, Seymour, I'm sure that, you're just here to have fun. But for the people who have had a legitimate experience that's not explained by science, I think about gorillas. And gorillas have only really been recognized by science for the last 100 years. But for 2,400 years before that, there have been reports. There were reports of gorillas back in Roman times. And science said, nope, it's not real. It's a myth. And then on an expedition 100 years ago, they found gorillas. And they said, oh, these things are real. Same thing with Komodo dragons. They were the stories of ignorant Indonesian fishermen until an expedition went out to those islands where they said they were seeing them and found them. And then these scientists discovered Komodo dragons. Platypus, again, a hoax. In fact, one was brought back to England and dissected. And those experts who dissected it said, this is one of the most clever hoaxes we've ever seen. And yet it's a creature that is extant today. And so mainstream science is always going to be the last to know. Like, if you think about the process of how science works, you're going to get reports from people in the field first, unverified. Yeah. When you're seeing something, it's only after years and years of study and verification and debates and paradigm shifts and people with strong opinions literally dying before new discoveries can be formalized by science. And so science is not a leading indicator of just about anything. It's always a trailing indicator. The leading indicator is going to be people in the field having genuine, authentic experiences. I think if you have a truly scientific mind, it's your job not to dismiss those as insanity or craziness or stupidity or ignorance or hoaxery, but to take in the data, find the patterns, and investigate with an open mind. I think that's where the world becomes wondrous again. And that's something worth having.
I'm sure it is as well. Yeah. Just before I go, I'll just tell you, just after Christmas and before Christmas just gone, there's been a sightings of black cats up our end again. Four golfers had seen a black cat on a golf course, and one of them said, "What the hell is that over there?" And he sat up for them. So they phoned police. They got somebody, wildlife person, to come down and have a look round, and probably trying to say it's not that, and they found someone was laying in that spot. Anyway, a day later, a woman saw it down in Danes Dyke. So it's still around, or is it? It could be a different one. It could be just one. It could be two, or it could be three. We just don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
But where can people get your books?
I'll be honest with you. I don't have a lot of books to sell you. I have an amazing store in the Columbia River Gorge. We'd love to have you come out and visit us. We've got a paranormal info center there.
Oh,
Gorge
brilliant.
Paranormal Info Center. You can check us out on Facebook and on Instagram, martysoutdoorstore.com.
If anybody's got any sightings or anything,
martysoutdoorstore.com, we have a paranormal reporting form, and we love to hear from folks.
Oh, brilliant. Because I think there's going to be more happening in this year. I think there's going to be more sightings than ever. I think there's going to be a lot more sightings of UFOs in the sky.
Yep, I agree.
Going to be one of them years.
I think so.
But thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been very interesting subject.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I'll keep in touch with you anyway.
Very good.
Right. Thank you for that. Thanks to my guest, and thank you everybody in chat room. My guest on Friday is Sue Ludden. She's from Scarborough, so she's not far away from me. She's a psychic medium, but she's a really, really good one. She'll be interesting to talk to. She'll be doing a few messages on Friday as well. Her husband's a psychic surgeon. We might talk a little bit about him and what he does as well. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day, James.
Will do.
And bye for now.